Okay, cool. So we're live and it's being recorded. So everyone that's here right now, we're going to wait just 1 minute to make sure that everyone can hop on before we get started. Okay, it's been a minute. Casper, do you want to start?
Let's get this ball rolling. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So everyone, I wanted to let you know that just a few housekeeping things. So before we kick everything off, we're recording the webinar and we're going to send it out probably I assume as soon as possible, I would assume, probably sometime this week. And then we'll do like a whole blog thing and put it on YouTube and all of that. So you'll have access to it after the fact. Also, there's going to be a Q&A session at the end. And there's a little, if you look at your Zoom window, on the bottom right-hand corner, there's a Q&A button, and that's where you're going to put your questions for Casper, and he will get to those within the last maybe like 10 minutes, and we'll see on time there. So let's go ahead and kick things off. So my name is Jessie Taylor, and I'm the content manager at Leadfeeder. And I have a little bio here for Casper that I'll go through. So Casper is currently the head of marketing at the fintech scale-up United Fintech. Having worked in multiple SaaS unicorns over time, Trustpilot and Timplify, talked at more than 30 plus events and numerous podcasts, and advised more than 40 plus startups. He knows a thing or two about growing a business from a marketing perspective. He brings a unique growth hacking mindset to the table and combines strategic knowledge with hands-on abilities in order to create something truly unique. There you go.
Wow,
all right, kick it off.
That's flabbergastingly awesome. Okay, that's cool. Always the awkward moment of bios, right? Like, okay, I'll take it from here. Thanks, Jesse. It really means a lot. I'm really glad to be here. It's actually fun because it's I've done this webinar, not the same one, but like I did a webinar with the Leadfeeder approximately 2 years ago on ABM, and it's always fun to go back and look at yourself and what you learned. And I can tell you guys that are watching today that a lot has happened, for at least for my understanding and how I do ABM in 2 years. And all of that sharing, I've literally compiled into what I'm going to show today. So let's get this ball rolling. We have a lot of ground to cover, so let's get to it. First things first, Jesse already covered it. I'm the head of marketing for United Fintech. I used to work for Templify, used to work for Trustpilot, some of the biggest unicorns coming out of Denmark, where I'm from. I like to call myself a self-declared expert in paid advertising. And I'm a huge nerd, like inbound marketing, chess. And I love to use emojis and stuff like that. So you'll probably notice that along the way. Okay, cool. So first of all, just one slider here. So the stuff I'm going to show you today is based on 2 companies, essentially. So it's based on what I've done from United Fintech, and it's based on what I've done for Templify. So Templify is one of the cases where we did a lot of work and do a lot of ABM. And United Fintech is a little bit, it's a newly bred company, haven't even closed in on a year yet. So the examples here are a little bit more limited, but it'll still be pretty cool to see. Just as a context slide here, just one off, then I'm done with that stuff. Essentially what we do is we acquire fintech companies in the capital market space, and then we scale them under one roof. Our goal is kind of to empower financial institutions to thrive and compete in the digital era. What we help them everything that's like commercial aspect related, so sales, marketing, optimization of processes across the board. And our typical target audience is financial institutions with more than 200 employees. We target senior marketing, senior product, and head of market data, CTOs, traders, brokers. Those are the people that we target with our solution. Of course, our case is a little bit special because we keep bringing in new companies, and that changes our ICP, which makes us pretty interesting. But also it means that there's still a common focus across the board. And we also try to like a lot of enterprises, we also try to sell to C-levels typically. Okay, so the agenda for today is quite simple. I'm going to go through 5 phases. So the 4 first ones are very interrelated, so they come in pairs. So first one, we'll go through the strategic part of it, so understanding ABM from a strategic perspective. Then we go into like go-to-market planning, how we get to your ICP and how we start building your list. Then I show you a little bit of what I mean with designing the how. So how do we design how to do ABM for the company you're in? And then we do the 4th one, which is the big ones, aligning with sales. How do we ensure that happens? And the last one I'm going to cover is a little bit of like an off-ball on the side, some of the tools, channels, and some of the hacks that goes with them that I haven't covered in the first 4, but I still think are relevant and something you should think about. Okay, first of all, understanding ABM from a strategic perspective. So first I want to cover this model. And the reason being is I want to get you guys to understand what I call the pillar foundation. So how and why do we cover this? The reason we cover this is that I want you guys to understand where ABM fits into your marketing planning. So I have I can't take full credit for this one, but I've essentially, there we go. In my opinion, there should be 3 foundations your marketing spend is based on, and this goes throughout all the marketing you essentially do. So first 60% is what I call always on. The purpose of always on is essentially to have, here you have your target audience, and that can be your ICP, and some people that you always want to be present towards. Like these people should always have you top of mind all the time with a specific message. And Templify, the typical example would say, if you're a brand manager in a large enterprise, then I always want to in front of you telling you how we can help you with like get your brand out the door internally in the company. That's the message I always want to get across the board. Then you have campaigns, and this is where I see a lot of mistakes being done. Some campaigns in my world exist for the only purpose of actually feeding into always on. So what that means is just saying you want to have campaigns. The purpose is like a lot of people do campaigns, and then they do campaigns for 3 months, and then they stop the campaign, and then they evaluate, and then they leave it there. And sometimes they do something about it, but other than that, they just leave it there, right? That's purposeless campaigning. Sorry, but that's how I view it. And what that means in my world is saying I want to do campaigns for the purpose of finding stuff I can put into always on. So it feeds into always on. And the last pillar, which is the pillar we're going to talk about today, is account-based marketing. And in my budget and what I'm aiming towards here, what I'm building is that ABM represents approximately 20% of my marketing spend budget. That number can go up and down. Like I'll leave that totally up to you guys. If you want to spend 10%, if you want to spend more, so be it. This is just the benchmark and the framework. If you want to think about it, then this is a pretty good starting point. Okay, then we want to talk about the 3 types of ABM. It's funny because I don't see a lot of people talk about this actual topic. I've been kind of curious about that. So essentially in my world, there are 3 types of ABM, account-based marketing, you could be doing. There's what I call strategic ABM, which is based on a 1-to-1 scale. Strategic ABM is when you say, okay, I want to nail this one customer. And this is actually in the perfect world, that's the core behind account-based marketing. And in the perfect world where you can do this, then this is what you do. So let's say, as an example, you would map out a lot of different companies, and then you say, I want IKEA as a customer. And then you make everything specifically about IKEA, and you actually devise an entire strategy around just closing IKEA. The reason that you can do that is if your investment and ROI per account is very, very high. So let's say you close IKEA as a customer, then it has to have a very high lifetime value. If you don't have a high lifetime value, then you put a lot of resources, because the problem resources into closing IKEA, but when you do that, you also have a very high CAC, right? So customer acquisition cost. So if your customer acquisition cost is high, but your investment in ROI, or at least your ROI per account, is low, well, then you have a pretty bad case. So you have to have high investment and high reward, and that's strategic ABM from my perspective. Then you have what I call ABM Light, and this is, to be honest, this is what the version I've done the most of. have done a bit of strategic ABM, and have also done a bit of programmatic ABM, but I've definitely done the most of ABM Lite, which is what I call one to few. And what does few mean? That's a $1 million question, I guess. But essentially, few is just saying you could have it could be anything from 10 and up to 50. I think 50 is typically where I say that you're really pushing it here, but it depends on the size of the company as well a little bit. But you want to have something like along those lines. Most cases I've built around is around 10 to 20, just to give an idea. So you market towards 20 companies, and typically when you have ABM Lite, the difference is when you do strategic ABM, you can talk specifically to IKEA in this case. When you do ABM Lite, it becomes a little bit more on common, like value props, common things. Yes, you can do a lot of personalization, and we'll get to that part. But on an overall level, there's a few compromises you have to do. On the other hand, the investment becomes lower, while sometimes the ROI might actually still be the same. So ABM Lite is typically a very good case for a lot of people. And then you have what I call programmatic ABM, which is everything in between. So it's a little bit a lot of people. Essentially, what you can do a lot of like highly targeted targeting, where you do personalization and do it on a scale. ABM as a concept is not meant for scale, but it can be done. That's why I've done it a few times, and you can do it with like programmatic display ads and stuff like that, where you can actually these days you can actually find people and find companies, and you can do it on a scale. Personally, I'm not a big fan of it, but I have seen it work. Okay, let's move on. So first question you need to ask yourself is, now I've showed you these two slides here on the different models I believe in, and I don't know if you believe in, but I do at least. And the question you got to ask yourself first is, does ABM even make sense for us as a company? And I've made this like little list of things that I think you should at least look to. And if you can't say yes to almost all of them, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. First of all, ABM is a B2B thing. Like, let's be real, it's a business to business thing. Why? But just because like the ROI and like the investment and the actual return, like sort of LTV, lifetime value of a customer, that's high in B2B. So I don't think you can probably find a case of a B2C case with ABM, but I've never seen one, and it is a B2B thing. So as I mentioned, you got to have high lifetime value. Your sales cycle also has to be quite sophisticated and can take a while. So let's say you have a B2B product where you deal with users, right? Like let's say your social media platform like Facebook. Then ABM doesn't really make sense to you, because one user is not necessarily worth more than another user. Maybe there's some intrinsic metrics there, but on a bigger thing, like it's not worth more. So you got to look at enterprise. Typically, it's enterprise level services, right? Like so, Templify is sold to large enterprises. United Fintech, we sell to large financial institutions, right? So the sales cycle is quite sophisticated, can take a while. It's not a definitive must, but it's definitely something to consideration. It's a big part of it. Lastly, you have a pretty good idea of your ideal customer profile. If like we'll get there today, but if you have no idea of who you're selling to, I don't know that these days, but let's say you don't have a good idea of who you're selling to, then ABM is going to be really hard. So typically what I like to say is that you start with a foundation. Like ABM is not the first tactic you pull out your back in 99% of the time. Then you lay out the foundation with always on and that campaign that feeds into that. Once you've proven traction here, then you get idea of your ideal customer profile, right? Your ICP. And once you have an idea of your ICP, then it makes sense to look into, okay, can we actually do ABM based on this ICP? And lastly, I think this is an important part too. You gotta have a sales team. So the example I like to use is Slack, right? So Slack has a sales team, but it's mostly what I call product-led growth. So Slack grows by the use of their product and how they utilize their product in their growth engine. So yeah, I think they have a sales team. I'm not too sure. It's quite a big company today, but at least in the beginning, they didn't have a pretty big sales team. So in your enterprise, in your way, you got to have a sales team, and you got to love to work with them. ABM is a unifier, and that's one of the biggest stakeholder issues you'll come across, is that ABM is not just a marketing thing; it's also a sales thing. It's a common unified thing that goes between the two silos, as I like. Okay, I can see I did my animations a little wrong here. Sorry about that. So the ABM framework that I like to take you guys through, and it represents the 1, 2, 3, and 4, is we want to identify our ICP first. Who's your best customer, and why do we want more of them? How do we calculate our TAM, our total addressable market? How do we build your account list? So once we identify the ICP, we need to build a list of these companies that we're actually going to focus on. And we build it based on your decision in the ABM model. So 1, 2, or 3, the one I showed above. But you can of course do it other ways. I'm not. This is just my way of doing things. So take everything I showed today with a grain of salt, and saying like this is not necessarily how you should be doing it, but if you do it like this, then it's a pretty good starting point. Design the how. I talked about this. How do you want to lure them in? What do we talk about? And lastly, ensure alignment with sales and optimize. One-to-ones, metric alignment. What metrics do we talk about? And content creation. So this is essentially the framework I've been working out, and it's been working pretty well so far. Okay, let's start with the go-to-market planning. So first, we need to see how do we identify the ICP. So I made after a while, we can after this session, you can guys get access. I made a little template for you guys. Just to illustrate what I've done, and it doesn't have to be complicated. Like everything I'm showing you today, I always try to take the simple route. You can always make it more complicated. You can always add a sophisticated technology and all this stuff. I'll show you some of that stuff, but let's start simple. So first of all, like what are the things I'm looking at? So there's some segment numbers, segment names. Those are not interesting part, but it's sample customers. So do you have any customers from the different segments? So the first ones represent, so you gotta spread your segments into actual numbers, then you gotta spread them into separate names that people can understand, and then you gotta have sub-segment names. I'll show all of this in the sheet in just 1 second. Then you gotta look at sample customers. What is some example of customers that fit into this specific segment? What is the company size you're looking at? Like what are the employees? How many employees are there in the company? Typically, company size is a really, really good metric to use because it's very tangible in coordination with LinkedIn specifically, which is a big ABM channel, right? These days, you can actually also target on LinkedIn based on revenue. So I would also include that. I haven't included that here. I actually forgot that. But it's a last 2 weeks ago, they implemented that you can target based on revenue on LinkedIn. So I would definitely also add that if you don't have that added already. Then you want to look at customers' goals and characteristics, essentially explaining why. Like, why is it they want your product? Like, what is it why are they interested? What is it you're trying to, what is it you can solve for them? This is the case I'm going to show here. And then in this case, we had a product here with TTM0. That's one of the companies we acquired. So how is their data displayed used, which is the how. So how do they use the product? And I'm going to see that in the sheet, but essentially you're asking the how, right? And then the personas, which is the who. So who are you selling this product to? So this you can remember ABM can be, you can be for, if you just have one product, well, then it's for the entire company, but it can also be very product specific. I like to do it very product specific because that narrows down the use case and makes it more tangible and more personal and more relevant, which is what it's all about. Then you look at key stakeholders. Is there anyone who needs to be involved in the process for this to work? Then you look at the TAM. I talked about this, total addressable market. We'll get to how you calculate that very soon. And then we talk about value proposition. So what is the value prop that we should go out to these guys? Typically, it's a lot tied in with the why and stuff, so it's not that different. But yeah, is it replacing product or is it a new product? Like, are you putting a new product to the market, so it's blue ocean, or is it replacing something else? What's the estimated current value of the actual the customer in that segment? And what's the disrupted value? I think disrupted value is one thing I'll cover in the TAM talk in a second. But essentially, disrupted value in my world refers to the fact that you can have your TAM, but you can also evaluate if that TAM is actually realistic to be disrupted. So some of the TAM you can say, okay, you have your total addressable market, and then you look at the market and say, okay, all of these use, let's use Bloomberg as an example, all of these use Bloomberg, and we know we have a very strong competitive advantage against that one. They should be added to disrupted value of the TAM. Okay, by the end of all of this, and mind you, I'll send this sheet, I'll send this template so you can use it afterwards, don't worry about it. But by the end of it, you should have something similar to this. So here you can see all the different categories on the left, and you can see all the different segments on the top. And then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then splits into different categories. And so I've blurred out the actual data in here because that doesn't matter to you guys in this case, but you get the point of where I'm going with this. At least I hope so. So once you've done that exercise, then the last part of it is calculating your time. I think HubSpot had a really good definition that I like to use. Essentially, what you do is just you multiply your average sales price by number of current customers. Essentially, what this gives you is your annual contract value. Once you have your annual contract value, then you multiply your annual contract value by the number of customers, and this essentially gives you your total addressable market. Said in my terms, in other words, total amount of customers times your annual contract value, that's your TAM. And then when I add the layer of disrupted value, again, that gives you a pretty good idea of where you can actually, if there's anything to move. I want to point out that I'm not a mathematician. I know metrics and stuff, but I'm not a mathematician. There's probably better ways to do this. There's probably more precise way to do this. I don't think it's about being extremely accurate. That's never been the case for me. That's never what I've cared about. The reason behind, at least for me, doing TAM exercise in this case is to get a general idea if a segment is interesting or not. That's the goal. The goal is to get, like, if there's no TAM, if like you have a TAM that's total addressable market, that's 20 times the size on a segment that's as easy to target and as easy to attract customers from, then why are you targeting the first one? Like it helps you differentiate between the segments, which is the entire goal behind it. All right. So let me give you an example, and this is from the TTM0 example that one of the companies we acquired, Staken. So essentially what we reached after doing that exercise, that, okay, we needed to target regional banks, in this case, a Danish bank called Danske Bank and Nordea. Okay, this as an example. The company size has to be 200 plus. They have all the pains and they see all the value. I'm not going to go into detail about what that is in this case, but it's there's a lot of stuff that fits. And essentially, their personas can be split into two types of people that we're looking at. We're looking at back office, we're looking at front office. So the people who manage the back end of their systems, and the front end people who manage all the marketing assets and all the stuff in the front. TAM is huge. There's a really, really huge TAM. And also the disrupted TAM is very large in comparison, which is the interesting part of this. Yeah, already covered this part. So once you've done that, so now we talked about TAM, right? So once you've actually set this, now you can actually with good confidence say, okay, this is actually the segment that we want to start with first. So you actually take a data-driven decision in getting to where should you start to focus. And now it becomes a lot easier to design your go-to-market strategy. I'm not going to go super much into detail around your go-to-market strategy because there's a million different ways to do it. And I did a talk 3 weeks ago about like 50 slides about how to do go-to-market strategy. So I'm not going to cover that. I'm just going to give you an example of how it could look. It could essentially be like, typically you have a go-to-market strategy around sales-led, right? So that's typical companies like SAP, Oracle, customer acquisition led primarily by sales teams. Then you have your product assisted, Salesforce, Tableau being ABM tool. That's the fun part, actually. Driven by customer expectations, try the product early in the process. And then you have product led as the ones I mentioned, Slack, Box, ThinkSell, stuff like that. So this is a typical explanation for why you would do product led growth, which is not what we're doing here. But my point being is this could be a slide in your go-to-market strategy. As I said, we're not going to go into depth to this, but in this case, when we're talking ABM, we're typically working with companies who are sales led. Okay, so now we got into the first part. We've identified the segments with the most potential. Yay, us. And then now we look at what are the actual companies that we need to focus on, because now we only identified the actual segments, but we need to identify what companies are in that segment. We have a general idea, but we need to actually get down to business and get down to what actually matters, right? So first, you got to build your account list. So first of all, what do you need? Well, the simple answer is just a good data provider. You can there's a million, there's so many out there, and I won't say all of them, but I used a lot. I've used a lot. The example I'm showing you guys here is based on ZoomInfo. I'm a big fan of ZoomInfo. Today we use Cognicism, so I'm just starting to learn that bad boy. I think that's pretty good too. But I've also loved to use Clearbit in the past. I've used BuiltWith. I've used DataNice. And I haven't put lead feeder on here, but lead feeder also is a little part of it. But in building your list, lead feeder is not. Okay, so you can use a bunch of different tools. Then also you can use what I call intent data, and this is the part where lead feeder comes in and other places. These days, intent data is like I feel like every time I read about this stuff, there's somebody talks about intent data. Intent data is really powerful, but you also gotta know what you do with it. Like intent data is become like a bucket where everybody just dumps their dumps their ideas. Intent data can be a lot of things. So it can be something as simple as going to LinkedIn, setting up your insight tag. Please do that. Please don't forget to do that. And then looking at your website demographics. So looking at, okay, we have here I've taken an example. You can even compare it to, no, I haven't done that in this case, but here you can even say like, okay, we're looking at website traffic to the front page. What are the actual companies that come into this page? If you have a specific ABM campaign that goes to a specific page, let's say you made a industry page for lawyers, or let's say we made one for regional banks here. Let's use the same example. Then we have a banks page that talks specifically about regional banks. Then you set up your insight tag, and then you look: is the audience coming to my page about these regional banks compared to my front page? Is that any different? Oh wow, it is different. They're spending more time. We're getting more and more people from these companies, and these are the companies that are appearing up. If you combine that with lead feeder or any of the other tools, Albatross or whatever, um, then you can actually get a pretty good idea of what they're looking at when they come to the site. So this is a really good example I wanted to use from Templify, where we had someone where we could really see that, okay, they search for template software, and then they look management software, template management, document content management. So all this stuff is super valuable, and you can feed it back into your ads afterwards, right? Lastly, I put in G2 and Capterra, and primarily it's actually G2. Capterra is not super big on this part, but G2 has a lot of super expensive, by the way, but that's whatever. But G2 has access to all this intent data, and especially review sites are really good. So it gives you intent. If somebody is looking at a category, let's say they're looking. Let's use Templify. It's a little bit better example here. Let's say they're looking at brand management software. Well, that's intent in my book, right? Because then they're definitely in the market for brand management software. And if that's what we do with Templify, then there's definitely, it is more interesting than someone who's not looking at the category. I think that's always how you have to view it. Okay. So it looks like something like this. Like this is an example I have where from an ABM, from an ABM shortlist in account pool we did initially, where you have a bunch of companies and you have a bunch of this is in a case on different entities. So there's some value props. I'm not gonna go into detail about that, but it should look something like this. It could be a huge Excel spreadsheet, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Like it could be a lot of different things. Okay, so now you build your list. A few mistakes before we move on to this. First of all, don't overdo it, but be specific. It's and what I mean by that is it's better to start small and then expand than the other way around. Like you can start, like sometimes I've seen people come back to me like, hey, these are the companies we want to close, and then it's a list of 2,000 companies, and I go like, okay, I also want to close 2,000 companies. I also want to close that many deals with the big companies, but maybe we haven't done our prep work properly. So try to be as specific as possible. You don't have to end with what just one company on your list, but try to aim for something around 10 to 50. That would be a really good number in my book. As I think I just used this example, but everybody wants to close the biggest companies. Like, and I think that's a mistake I see over and over again, where people essentially go out and say like, hey, I just want to, IKEA is the biggest furniture furniture store company, whatever company in the world. That's the one we want to close because that's a perfect fit for us. That's the one we focus on. But maybe that's not the right segment. So that the reason we do that exercise in the top is to actually get down to the bottom of what is actually the right segment and what are the companies in that segment that we should be focusing on. Okay, so now we worked on our ICP. We've gotten pretty close to our ICP. We built an actual list of companies that we can use. Now we need to do the fun part and decide how we get them. So you can do a lot of cool things here. And here specifically, I took in 2 examples of some of the companies or some of the examples I thought it was really good out in the open. So I'm a huge proponent of Drift. I'm gonna talk a little bit about Drift later on. I use Drift. I haven't implemented it in United Fintech, but I used it a lot in Templify. It's on my bucket list of tools to buy next year. But but Drift is an awesome tool, and it's getting better every day with what you can do with personalization. So essentially, the example they have here is here with data from either Clearbit or whatever it is, you can make it as personal and relevant and specific as possible. So you can use this intent data that you have from either G2, from LinkedIn, from wherever it is, as long as you store it somewhere, and then you can actually feed it into Drift. The thing about Drift is they integrate with Clearbit, I think it is, Clearbit automatically, and that's what I used in the past at least, to actually automatically get that intent data into Drift. That means that IKEA's website is more important than ever, right? If you get that message in front of you, I don't have to tell you that's going to convert better. It will, trust me, and it did. It did. So we did a lot of these different things over at Templify, and we didn't do it as sophisticated and as well as Drift has done. All things being equal, but we had really good results by just doing small things. I think these Procurify guys did some really good. A really good example here where they essentially replaced good data across the board. So this was a case where they made a specific landing page where they use personalization. You can do this with a bunch of different things. Like it doesn't have to be expensive. You don't have to buy the very expensive ABM tools. You can buy Google Optimize and then find a good data provider and maybe a place to get intent data. That's all you need. And then a landing page builder, if that's HubSpot, if that's Unbounce or whatever it is, that's not what it's about. Of course, the tools and the big tools make stuff easier, but it doesn't have to be better always. My last point about this is or my point here is just don't overcomplicate it. Just make a landing page for each account. That's also fine. Like if you have 10 accounts you want to target, you don't have to personalize it with a tool. Maybe you just make 10 different landing pages where you change the name and the image, right? Like let's be simple sometimes. Okay, so let's do an example here. I have a few examples that I want to show where I've done some pretty cool stuff that you can steal. Feel free to go. So in Templify, we identified some of the segments we had, and then I set up a Google trend and mention for what I call compelling events within the companies. So if these companies were going through fusions, rebranding processes, or Forbes reports, then that would trigger my Google trend or my mention. And I would get a notification, and then I would automatically feed them into this campaign. Here we did so whenever some of the companies would go through a fusion or rebranding process, or then of course that's a compelling event, right? That company, wow, that's a right ICP, a right segment, and they're going through a compelling event. Now is the time to really push the button on this value proposition that we have to them. We did the same, and I can't take credit for this one. I think this is Emma from my team. This is really awesome thing where she essentially did. There was this Forbes report where they went out to all the 500 companies, biggest brands. I think it is a brand success in the world. And then we went out to all of them individually that was in our ICP and was interesting to us and say, hey, congrats on being the top 500 brand. And then sometimes we even made specific landing pages for them. And that's this part of saying you doesn't have to be sophisticated. You can actually be quite smart about it. Then you got to utilize your knowledge about them. So when you do the sheet in the beginning, I put up a few fields, but you can also put in more information, right? It doesn't really have to stop there. So if you use your data provider, and this is one of the best hacks I've ever done, and it's actually something, we'll call it a hack, but it's just smart thinking maybe, I guess. But essentially what you can do is you can use your data provider to give you insight on what the technology stack looks like for a company. So essentially what you can do is that you take your account list from the beginning, and then you identify, okay, what part of this account list, or maybe you use it as a first point, you can also do that. But then you can say, what part of this list is using Salesforce? So in this case with Templify, we had an amazing integration with Salesforce that essentially, we still have it, but essentially allows you to automatically create documents and contracts directly from Salesforce. It's awesome. If you have Salesforce, Templify is a must win, right? And essentially what we could do then is we could talk specifically to the fact that they have Salesforce to the same ICP that we also focused on in our IBM. And that way, it all comes back to my point a little bit earlier on. We got to make it relevant and we got to make it personal. We have to try to get as close to relevancy as you can. This campaign specifically was one of the lowest cost per leads we ever did. And that's despite the fact that it's actually an ABM campaign. You can do a lot with this stuff, and it doesn't have to be super complicated, but you can actually, if you think about smart, how your product fits into with your ICP and what their value is, then you can get pretty far. So this one is a little bit of a longer example, and it's just an example of saying this is also a way you can design how to get there, right? Design your audiences. So essentially what I built here, it's a little bit complicated, but I built a fully automated HubSpot into Zapier Salesforce Drift 23 flow. What I did is I made a personal video outreach flow. These days, so this one is 2 years old or something when I did it, and these days I do it a little bit differently. I do it more simplified because nowadays I just do it with Drift and I do it with Lemlist. That's and HubSpot. That's essentially all I do. But this is just to illustrate that you can actually do this with even less tools. So what I would do back then is I would say, okay, so I would go into this account-based list we did, and then I would say, okay, we're going to get a few leads in there. So let's focus on the job title, job function that matters. In this case, for this example here, it was IT and marketing. Let's focus on the companies. So we talk about the companies. Let's focus on their name. If we can, that gets a little bit specific, but you don't always have to do that. That's more for the videos to this. You can do that with Lemlist, by the way. So, and then you can focus on the industry, right? So we made these totally scrapped emails that were scrapped of everything, and then used our BDR, our inbound specialists, right? And then we made specific videos, a bunch of different videos that illustrate and said, hey, I see you work at the IKEA in the marketing department. Really cool to meet you. Just want to hang out or just want to chat, right? So this back then we used Pardot, but you can. This is just to again just to show how it can get really complicated really fast, but it doesn't have to be. In HubSpot, this is a lot easier to build. Hashtag Pardot. But but I think this looks a little bit cooler than it actually is. But the point is just with this, you can actually segment pretty far down the line and actually get super personal when people inbound on ABM campaigns. And I think that's the point with it. Then we would go and make personal drift bots, and we would use some of the inbound reps. We would set up very personal things around them. So like Jacob, Danny, John in that case, like, hey, what are they doing? Make their bios, and then we would have their own bots, as you can see out here on the right. This is our old landing page. It doesn't look Templafy's landing page back then. So it would be like, hey, great, let me grab you a time on Danny's calendar, and you can book him right here. So people would go through that flow and end up on the website, where sometimes on even the ABM websites, and then they would go to or the ABM landing pages, and then they would actually book a meeting directly in there, right? And this is a pretty good way to get really personal with the people you talk to, right? So and then you can say, like, what do you get out of it? Well, you get a not fully automated, but almost fully automated ABM campaign. Like, and you can do this replicate. It doesn't just have to be ABM. You can technically do it for other stuff. But my point with doing this back then was like, here, and you can see this 2 years old, some of these cases here, but hey, Danny, thanks for your note. We want to schedule a time to hear your pitch. Let me know if you have any availability to discuss, blah, blah, blah. And it's a good example of saying this you can do automatically. Like, just set up your ABM campaign and coordinate this with sales. So these guys, okay, they were aware this was happening, and you can coordinate the efforts, right? And then you can even get to the point where people book themselves in, right? So they would actually schedule a call. These people with this call, in this case here with Jacob, that would actually be scheduled and actually be working on. That's pretty cool, and that's just a way to say. Some people believe you can't scale ABM. I beg to differ. You can. This is one of the ways that you can scale it a little bit. It's not supposed to be super scalable, but this is definitely one of the ways you can take it and scale it to some extent. Okay, so now we've seen a few examples of how you can design the how. Now I'm going to take you through the flow of how you align with sales, and then getting to the actual nitty-gritty stuff. It's pretty nitty-gritty already, but. Okay, first things first. If you want to have success with ABM, you got to dedicate resources. So you have your classic approach without ABM, which is comprised of outbound and inbound BDR. So you have an outbound classic BDR, they cold call people, try to get them through LinkedIn, whatever. And then you have your inbound BDR, which is handling all marketing. This is the classic approach and how you structure it. What I'm proposing and what I think everybody should do, if you have the resources for this is probably not for your super small startup, but if you're a scale up, then this is what you're looking at, is introducing what I call ADR. ADR essentially just stands for an account development representative. This can only be done if you have a very high LTV. You have got to have a really high lifetime value, but again, if you don't have that on doing ABM, then something's wrong, right? So you got to have a really high LTV. and you got to focus on companies that are relatively large, so one person can focus on a very small specific set of companies. So essentially, account development is the same as an outbound rep. The only difference is that person focuses on very specific companies all the time. Doesn't change. Like, of course, you can change it once in a while, strategic directions, blah, blah, blah. But essentially, it doesn't change from month to month or week to week. You're still trying to book a meeting with IKEA when you show up in October or November. Doesn't matter, right? Cool. Then you got to divide and conquer a little bit. So first of all, there's a few things you do together. So together, you pick your accounts based on your ICP and based on your ABM model. So we walk through the ABM model. Once you've decided on your model, decided on your ICP, you decide on which one to go for together. Right? Then you evaluate and optimize. So like along this process, everything here can be optimized all the time. So you got to keep remembering that when you do this stuff. Then lastly, the ownership is mutual. And I think that's really important, something a lot of people forget. I don't have a really good tip for actually doing this other than doing this, but making sure that everyone takes responsibility for the ownership around it. So what I would goes into saying that is that you have some specific things that the ADR is responsible for, and you have some specific things that the marketing department is responsible for. So the ADRs are responsible for connecting with relevant stakeholders. Typically, they use LinkedIn, right? Email, they call, they do follow-ups, and they typically also responsible for everything that happens on Drift. So that means they can get notifications on their mobile when somebody comes into a landing page and interacts with their bot on Drift, or just comes in generally, and then they can interact with them to chat live, stuff like that. All of that, that's the ADR table. Then you have your marketing department typically takes care of your targeted ads, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever platform you use. Also be Google Ads with custom intent. There's a lot of possibilities here. And then you can do your landing page setup, right? So having dynamic setup with IP targeting and stuff like that. And that's the stuff I refer to as personalization. Again, you don't have to go there. It's just, this is the technical cool way to go. And then you have marketing responsible, all the blog posts, all the industry pages, the content. The ownership lies with marketing here typically, but it's, of course, it's a close collaboration with your ADRs. And then you have webinars, you have events, breakfast meetings, personal gifts, letters. All this should technically be part of your journey to acquiring these companies, right? Does that mean you need to include all 9 of them, or technically 12 in this case, every single time? No, I wouldn't say so, but it's definitely, if you're doing all 12, then you're definitely on the right path. Start simple. So saying if you don't want to do landing page setup with dynamic IP changing for personalization, then don't start there. Make some simple ones. If you only can make one blog post and do that, skip the industry page. Whatever it is, just get something out the door and start rolling on it. And then this is the benchmark for where you want to get to eventually. So how do you measure the success of ABM, and how do you essentially get people on board? So maybe this slide should be moved up, but I kind of moved it down. I couldn't move the side where I wanted. but essentially my point is just to say, I've stole this beautiful revenue metric little slide here from some of my friends. One friend, Andre, and Vladimir from a company called Full Funnel. They did a really cool webinar on ABM as well. I think this was perfect. This is exactly. I'm a little bit sad that I didn't invent this, but so be it. But essentially, what they look at is just like revenue metrics. So how many accounts are we working on? What are the engaged accounts? That's a percentage of that, right? What are discovery calls we're doing into that? How many sales qualified? How many deals won? Average deal value, expected revenue. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I think the important part is this last part here, where you look at where you compare your ABM to your other ways of campaign performance. And it could be cold outreach or your typical outbound, or it could be ads, which is your typical marketing, right? What you're looking at here is essentially the last part of it, like CAC and ROI, right? If that is positive, like so CAC positive, but if your CAC over LTV makes sense in terms of your ROI, then you have a good case, right? So these are some of the metrics. I think my point with this is, as I said to a lot of the other stuff here, don't overcomplicate it. You don't have to do all of the metrics on it, right? But doing some of it definitely helps you get you in the right direction. After having seen this slide, this is how I started to do it now. And how I'm rolling it out for United Fintech. But I think just doing half of this will at least make you better than 99% out there. The easy route, and this is my take on it. So if you don't want to do all this stuff on the right, or you don't have access to all this data, then I would look, and this is actually what we did initially in Templify, they've evolved a lot since that, also since I left, but the number of opportunities in targeted accounts. So is that growing or not? If that's growing at a more exponential rate than usual, good sign. Lastly, engagement intent measured from targeting account. Can we see that they're looking at the things we want them to see it? It's a bit of a vanity metric, but it's still a good indication if you're moving the right direction. Then I'm running a little low time, so but we're also closing in on the finish line, so it's pretty good. So what is the easy way to align? So my weekly my easy way to align, ensure that there's alignment between sales. There's the manual way, which is what I'm talking about here, which is not that manual, but a little bit manual. And it's just to have some catch-ups, like spend some time on actually sitting down with your salespeople, have a Slack channel, send updates on emails, have where you coordinate things, have one reporting place to rule them all. I have it in Data Studio, Google Data Studio. It can also be in your CRM. So I have it a little bit combined between the two, but it can also be somewhere else. I don't really care. Just have one place where both the teams look at. It's the same data you talk about. You should be unified in how you talk about it. So I have a case here of how you can solve the sales alignment, in my opinion. One of the best cases we ever did for Templify. So typically the problem in this case is that your sales team is hitting a specific batch of people. Even though we defined our account list, even though we defined it super narrow, or we got as narrow as we could, then you can never be entirely sure that you're focusing on the same people. So let's say you target Brian. Marketing gets in front of Brian on a Monday with an ad, but Brian was contacted, and then Karsten is the one that they call on Monday. So sales team is trying to contact Karsten instead. And so you can't always be sure that people's actually hitting the same people. Like even though it's a small team and stuff, you can't hit them at the right time. But there's actually a way to do that. So one of the ways we did is we participate in an early beta, which is not beta anymore because it's a little old. But what we did was we took the campaign manager, so you're in LinkedIn, and then we took LinkedIn Sales Navigator, which is like what they use in what every BDR rep these days use, right? And then essentially we implemented it together with SalesLoft, which is like a cadence tool. And what you get here, as you can see, I've highlighted in the bottom, is you get a button essentially called Save in Sales Navigator. Super simple, one button. Once they click that, or they do it in Sales Navigator itself, so you can do it in SalesLoft, you can also do it in Sales Navigator. And I think they've evolved integration, so I would check that up just to be sure. But you can actually save these different leads. And what happens here, here's the interesting part. This gets, within 24 hours, this gets automatically synced up with your campaign manager and actually creates an audience based on the people they saved. So you can imagine if you created your account list based on your ICP and you have a big, beautiful list of companies you want to target, then your sales reps and your ADRs, they sit down and say, okay, let's get started with IKEA. And then he finds all the brand managers or in IKEA, and then he just saves all of them, and then they automatically feed into your list, and then you target those people. 24 hours later, I was always hitting those people with ads. One more note I forgot to add here. This was beyond the technology stack. This was the best campaign we ever beyond retargeting. This was the best campaign we ever did for Templify. The best, not even close. This was the best thing we ever did for Templify. Lowest cost per lead and cost per opportunity ever. And it's crazy. We literally have cases where people would jump in and we would get on call with them, and then they would say, hey, yeah, it's funny. I saw you guys ad a few days ago or whatever, right? And that to me is the perfect example of sales and sales and marketing alignment. So just to round off, this is some of all the stuff you can do. Now I'm gonna go here and just show some of the stuff and the hacks that go with them. That doesn't necessarily have to fit into this whole plan I've used. It didn't in this case, but I think you can use some of them if you want to. So first of all, I just want to say, like all these tools I've used, and there's probably a bunch I've forgotten in my ABM tool stack. There's a lot. There's so much, right? Like there's so many channels. There's so many tools. There's so many different things you can do. So don't worry about what tool it is. Worry about what it can do. So there's disciplines like data providers, ZoomInfo, BuildWith, Clearbit, Datanyze, Cognizant, whatever. There's insights like Hotjar. There's insights on ICP like a Leadfeeder, Albacross, those kind of guys. There's the different Yahoo, Bing, typical channels nobody uses. There's definitely a lot of potential super cheap traffic. Outbrain Taboola for display for some native advertising, right? So there's so many different opportunities. Reddit, I've used a lot as well. Review sites. There's a lot of stuff, and I haven't covered all of it. It's just to say you can do whatever you want. Just know what the purpose of it is. There's even I forgot to add these ones. Well, Drift, Zapier, 23. So one of the cool things I've done is that I've done a filtration hack. So one of the core problems with ABM, not a problem per se, but one of the things that's a negative about ABM is that it has a very high CAC, right? So customer acquisition cost. So what I would do is I would essentially filter traffic. So I would try to filter traffic based on what I could find out about my ICP. This is very hard to do, and it doesn't work all the time. It's gotten a little bit harder with some of the changes, iOS 14 and all these different ITP in general and tracking and GDPR in Europe. So it's not as easy as it used to be, but it's still it's a pretty good hack in general. Is that you can combine cheap traffic with LinkedIn. So to get display ads from Google with custom intent. Focus on Bing. Bing is a super cheap channel. Same goes for Yahoo. Native ads, super cheap still, just a lot of trash in between. So make sure it counts. So maybe find out the pages. Let's say you have a page. One of the best hacks I've done, one of the coolest things I've done, is use customer intent. So use, let's say IKEA. Let's just keep using that. And all the employees have a sign up page. I don't know how you find that, but let's say you find it, where they all log in. Then use that page for your custom intent audience, right? So everybody, then you suddenly have an audience of all the people who go to this login page. This is only for IKEA employees, right? And then you actually target based on that. Just an idea. Then there's a little bit of advanced tools, and this is for the outreach side of it. I just want to give a small warning. You don't want to be a little bit careful with these. These are not for everyone. So you can use stuff like DuckSoup and Linktober. So if you've ever gotten a message from from somebody who appears to be a bot or automated, well, then it's probably some of these tools. There's literally hundreds of these tools. So my favorites are these two. Linktober is even more on the iffy side. So I'm a big fan of DuckSoup. What you can do is you can auto visit profiles, you can auto connect, auto message. So if you set that up with your account list, your ADR, and you give them these tools and show them how to use them, trust me, they'll book a lot more meetings than they ever have. A little bit more user friendly, which is the one I use today. This has evolved a little bit. DuckSoup is a little bit more sophisticated, but the user-friendly version of that is Octopus. I use that a lot. I use it literally yesterday, so I use it a lot. Here you can essentially upload your account list, and then you can say, okay, I want to focus on these people, and then it just starts trawling through them. So it's a really good way to get out the door pretty fast, and it's a way to scale something that shouldn't be scaled. Let's put it like that. Prospecting, it's pretty, I use Get Prospect, use that a lot, Get Prospect IO. Essentially what you can do is take your account list and then use LinkedIn together with that account list to actually find the people's work email. Pretty powerful. And then the last one, that's the Phantom Buster, which is probably one of my top 5 favorite tools ever. So Phantom Busting can do a lot of things. I haven't only covered just a few of them, but essentially what it can do is it automates a lot of like repetitive tasks. So what it can do is like it can search, it can scrape a lot of things. It can scrape data from Sales Navigator, take that data out, and then help you send it somewhere else. So let's say you want to do a LinkedIn search and start sending personal videos to them. Well, then it can scrape the LinkedIn search and then send it over to Lemlist, which is a tool I use sometimes, and then send personal videos out. That's just the way to do it, right? The last part, I think this is, if I'm not mistaken, this is my last slide. This is this part where we talk about getting more insights and acting on it while using Hotjar and Lead Feeder. So Hotjar is one of my favorite tools, but my biggest problem with Hotjar has always been that it comes and goes in effectiveness. Like, sometimes when I launch a new website, love it. Hotjar is the best. Sometimes I don't look at it for like 2 months. Let's be real here. So what I did and what I still recommend doing is that you can use Lead Feeder's API. They have an API. It's pretty cool, to get specific company information out of your Hotjar information. So Hotjar doesn't tell you what person is, but it gives you the IP. So what if you combine that with Lead Feeder, you can actually see, okay, so it's not just a random person from Sweden, it's actually IKEA who's been looking at our page. And now then you can take that Hotjar information and suddenly it becomes way more valuable, right? Because suddenly you're looking at, okay, so IKEA has been scrolling on mobile. It seems to be IKEA, they apparently only work with, let's say, mobile phones, devices, and they have an issue with the landing page we created. It doesn't work as well as it should be, right? There's so much information there, and suddenly you become tangible. You can even take that information both from Hotjar and Lead Feeder and shoot it into your CRM, which is in case I use HubSpot in this case, and you can get this information directly shot in. Stuff like to respond to your landing page, to respond to your CTA. It's really good. It's really powerful. Okay, I did have a slide more, sorry. Last one, I think, is I wanna just highlight how important something like Zapier can be all of this process. Zapier gets a lot of credit these days, but it's also worth it. You can do this with like you can also do the sophisticated version of using Zapier is to use a CDP, something like Segment. I've used that at Templify. I haven't gotten there yet to use it at United Fintech. It's on the bucket list as well. But that's a sophisticated version. But until you get to that point, you can actually use Zapier to do a lot of the dirty work. So one of the hacks I did, if you can, I noticed 4 different images going a lot of different directions here. But what essentially I would do is I would take all the qualified leads that we had from our ICP and lead feeder that came to our website that we were not actually doing anything about, right? This is not just an ABM hack, but a hack in general. Like this is something I would definitely do if, today, recommendable. And what I would do then is that I would set up a lead feeder. I've set this up for United Fintech as well already. Is that you set up a lead feeder audience or a lead feeder feed where you have your CRM account owner, and then he can actually follow the accounts. And then you feed that information directly up to Salesforce. This is Templify, where you can actually see the visits, and then you can have your Zapier ties the room together. So now these days, a lead feed, I think they have a Salesforce. I don't use Salesforce today, but they have a Salesforce integration, so you can do this automatically. But back then, you at least had to automate it. But Zapier can automate it all your way. And I think the important automation is always to just get it into Sheets. Like if you can get your information into Google Sheets, then it's your playground. Right? That's the stuff I had today. I think we are pretty much on time with a 1 hour, a little bit lower, so we don't have too much time for Q&A, but I'm happy to stay if people have some questions. For guide slides, reach out to me on LinkedIn, or I'll coordinate with Jesse so you can get them if you want as well. You can use a bot.
Absolutely. That was amazing, Casper. I learned so much myself, so that was super entertaining to watch and sit through. Guys, if you want to put in the Q&A any other questions that you have, let me see. I think my colleague Anna has replied to a few of these. There will be a recording. We just talked about that. Okay, so Casper, we have, did your sales teams also use cold calling? If so, did you get direct numbers from Zoom Info or other tool, or used general phone numbers?
Great question, Mark. Absolutely. So your ADR is not like your ADR. I think there's a separation between sales and ADR in this case, right? So your ADR, essentially your outbound team, they definitely also do cold calling because unless you're the best marketeer in the world, which it's not me at least, right? Then I couldn't supply them with enough inbound ABM leads to keep them busy all the time. So they're not that different than from our normal outbound reps in that they always try to do cold calling or to try to source a lot of their stuff themselves. But then of course we coordinate so it makes it a lot easier and they help with the inbound assets. And yes, on the last part, we use Zoom Info to get the telephone numbers. And today on United Fintech and your Cognizant and potato. I think both are great tools.
All right, let's move on to this next one from Michael. We are a B2G, I guess maybe B2C, B2B, I don't know, startup who hit the ground running and are looking to scale rapidly. We are just starting to apply an account-based marketing process. Any advice on government customers and how to close, business government, how to close deals with lots of stakeholders and deciders involved? And will you share the presentation?
Okay, so there's a lot of stuff in that one. So first of all, I think the entire presentation is inspiration for that question, right? I think there's a lot of the things you can do here that doesn't really change if it's a government you're trying to target or if it's something else. People are people. And people use the same, if you're in government, you use the same channels. LinkedIn has the same power to find government people, officials, because they still have a LinkedIn profile. Same with other platforms. So that doesn't change. Was there anything else in the question I missed?
Let me see. Oh wait, there's an answer. Oh, here, I have it. We are starting, if you go to the answered tab, it'll be in there, Casper.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, there we go. So lots of stakeholders. Well, all of this I've showed you here is exactly that. You have to remember one thing I didn't cover maybe is that it's really good to make material that people can download and share, something that's shareable. If that's a guide or if that's a webinar they can pass around, something you can pass around internally. That's usually my go-to for when there's a lot of stakeholders, which happens to be all the B2B enterprise I do. That would be my advice. So make something tangible. It doesn't have to be super boring, but it could be a webinar like this, or it could be something else that they can pass along. Because a lot of this, with a lot of stakeholders, what people often forget is what we call, I call the dark funnel, right? So all the stuff that happens in between, mouth to mouth, people talk. So typically the intern gets responsible for, hey, can you find a tool and sees your ad and then downloads your guide or sees your webinar and then says, hey, hey, Brian, I found this really cool tool. Watch this webinar and tell me what you think, or whatever it is, right? So give them something tangible that they can pass on. That's a really good
Next one, this is great stuff, but I'm curious, how much time does it typically take in the planning phase, say for one to few ABM?
That's a great question, Anjali. Really good question, actually. Don't overdo it. So my biggest take on this, it cannot take you more, a maximum of 1 month. If you do more than 1 month of prep on this, like on the first part of the strategy, then you spend too much time. Typically, when we launch a go-to-market, when I focus on a go-to-market and we prepare this stuff, it takes me somewhere between 1 to 2 weeks. 2 weeks if I understand the use case very well, or less than 2 weeks if I used to understand it very well. If I don't understand the use case very well, then it takes up to 2 weeks. And the reason being is just there's a lot of stakeholder coordination. So sometimes if I don't necessarily fully understand the product that we're about to do this with and like conduct the ICP around, then then I need some other people to chip in, and they all have busy calendars just like I do, and coordinating that stuff. That's actually what takes the most time for me, because actually filling out, once they get started and filling out the sheet together, then it doesn't take that much time.
Muted myself. Okay. So I think the next one, I've been making lots of LinkedIn connections, but not able to get meetings.
Approach, man. Like my best
sales.
advice. Yeah, no, but simply put, so my take on this is pretty, not, this is going to be extremely high level, but let's do this. My approach is simple. You are doing it wrong if you're pushing for a meeting as the first thing. Make a 3-step funnel. So make a funnel where you say, hey, I just want to introduce myself and just be there. And you got to give value 9 out of 10 times before you take it. A lot of people, the first thing they do is like, hey, nice to meet you. Here's what I want you to buy. and if you do that, then that's not going to work. But so what I would instead do is say like, hey, Murdy, I'm Casper. Nice to meet you. Really good to be in touch. Then I would share, like I do normally, hey, social selling. I would say, hey, I did a webinar with Leadfeeder. Here's the slides. Hey, I did this recording. And the other day I talked at an event about LinkedIn last week. Bum, bum, bum. Here's some slides. Boom, whatever it is, I'll help you. Hey, do you need help? I can help you stuff. And then after 2 or 3 months, I set up a flow for some of these outbound reps. I know sometimes you don't have time for this, but that's fair enough. But if in the perfect world, I would definitely recommend, don't make it too long, like too short. Like don't sell on the first call. Don't sell on the first message you send with your tools, right? Do it after at least 2 weeks or something. Like make sure there's some time in between, because other than that, you're just burning bridges. Yeah.
Okay, so the next one, on example 1, was Google Trends enough in this scenario? Have you tested other monitoring tools?
Google Trends was not enough. I used Mention as well. That's why I used Mentions. Mentions is way better. But I used a combination of the two. Like I had both on just to make sure, but I'm sure you can use something else. Like my version is just very, very cheap. I think Mention is, I can't remember how much it is, peanuts, and Google Trends is free, right? So you can get pretty far with those two, but you can of course do other stuff. Like I've used stuff like Brandwatch and Falcon.io in the past, so these social media monitoring tools. But then you're like, if you have those tools, by all means, I would use them. But if you don't have access to those kind of tools, then I'll use Google Trends or Mention.
Okay, there's a part 2 to this question. On example 2, any other tips on how to discover accounts tech stacks?
It's so company specific. I think some of the tools I mentioned do it differently. So I think BuildWith is a really good one for just looking at tech stack, but DataNice is also a very good version of just scraping. So if your tool is based on what you can see on their website, then DataNice is the perfect one. The reason ZoomInfo, as the example I've used here, is so good is that they do this like qualification thing that goes beyond their first qualification. Like a lot of these companies do these like scraping where they scrape data and then it passes around. It's kind of weird. But what ZoomInfo at least that's a little bit special in that case is that they do a little bit of qualification, and that qualification actually gets you behind the door, and that gives you the information behind. So my recommendation would just be like, what are the things you're building towards? If your product, if you have a bunch of integrations that said like this integration we're really proud of, this is awesome, then I would take that integration and say, okay, how can we figure out if people are using this? And I would look at those tools, and if those tools don't give me the answer, then I would try to be a little bit more creative, but then it's probably a little bit hard. You're muted
again.
yourself.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Once again, did you use intent data from Zoom Info? Companies that are searching online for specific keywords /service/product, and then include them in the ICP.
So when I did it with Zoom Info, they hadn't rolled out that feature. I think they were about to roll it out when I did it back then. And now these days we use Cognitism. So unfortunately, no. But I'm aware that they have it now. And if I was to use Zoom Info today, then I would definitely do it.
Okay. So the next one, I work with an agency and have multiple clients I work with. I'm running an ABM campaign for one of them right now, although I want to plan properly and do all of the things you mentioned about, but it would take a lot of time, agency life. I currently started with email and LinkedIn ABM, but there's a lot of scope to cover. What do you suggest?
So, and one thing, I want to come back to Marco's question in just one sec, because there's something I missed, but I'll take that after. But just this, Anjali, it's a really good question. I've never worked agency side, so I'm not going to be an expert here, but I do have helped a lot of companies as a consultant on the side. So first of all, I've never driven as a consultant. I think it's really hard to drive ABM. I'm going to be real with you here. Because ABM is an integrated thing together with marketing and sales. And if you're a consultant on the side, you're already on the back foot in terms of doing proper marketing. Hard feelings. And then and then if you also have to integrate and create this relationship between sales that has to exist, then it's hard. Like, it's going to be really hard. What I would do in your case is I would set up the systems like you explained here, you did, where you have your LinkedIn stuff. So you do your LinkedIn campaigns and you can do all the cool hacks and all the strategy around it. So I would do all the prerequisites, and then I would list the things that you need from them. So guys, if I am to do this, then I will do X, Y, Z. I'll do all these different things. And then I'll require that you do this, this, and this. And we need to be aligned, and you need to have a weekly alignment or whatever it is, meeting where we talk about this, which is not something people are used to paying for with an agency maybe, right? So that's something I would do. I hope that makes sense. Let's go back to Marco, because I think I missed the part I really liked about his question. I'm just gonna go back.
I put his in the answered section.
Yeah, I got it. So
Okay, cool.
Searching online for specific keywords. So I do a lot with Google Ads around this. I know you can do even more stuff with some of the intent data from other platforms, and specifically G2 Crowd feeds into that. But here you can actually get pretty far just with Google Ads. The hard part about this is also the basic filtering, right? So figuring out what keywords is a specific keyword for a person from a company can be a little bit hard. But I always think it's a part of your due diligence around your launching your ABM campaign. It's just hard to do. So you can use these different intent platforms. That's a different game. But if you just look at Google Ads specifically, or Bing or whatever, then it's a little bit harder exercise. What I would typically recommend is just going into your tool, Ahrefs, SEMrush, whatever you use. I use Ahrefs. And then look at finding, what I've done in the past is finding competitors, or finding something similar, finding something where you can say, okay, this feels similar to a type of search that person would do. Maybe let's use my IKEA example. Then all IKEA employees have to do X, Y, Z. Okay, if they have to do X, Y, Z, then take that search, take that search keyword frame, and then figure out what people put it into. There's Ask the Public. And then in that tool, it's just a website thing where you just put it in, and then it finds out all the questions people ask regarding that search. That could be a way to do it, and that's a way to do it, but it is hard. It's an uphill battle.
Someone commented that I think it's Answer the Public maybe is
the
website.
Yes, that's right. Sorry. My bad. I'm a little tired.
You also have mentioned 800 tools, so I can't even imagine. Okay, so we have one last second part question. Do you see this one in the open? So they asked, do you also mean in this 1 month we are ensuring the tech stack is also in place?
No, that's just the planning of all of the strategic elements and stuff. Preparing the assets. If you move fast, it depends so much how big your team is, right? If you're a one-man startup, yes, then move fast and accept that nothing's perfect when you launch. If you're a 100-man marketing team that decides to do this, then I expect something different, right? So it's different. I can't say. I move fast in tech stacks because I know how they work and how to do it. But if you don't, then it's going to take more time.
Cool. I think that is those are all the questions that we have. So thank you so much, Casper, and to everyone still on. We'll be sending out a just to follow up with all the information, and definitely follow Leadfeeder and Casper on LinkedIn, and we'll be sharing sharing follow-ups, and you can message us if you have any questions, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, stay tuned for the next webinar, and thanks again, Casper.
You're welcome. Thanks, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day and good luck with your ABM.
Bye.